ECB is going negative with interest rates. They're going to be charging people to keep cash in these banks. So they're very desperate here. This just shows you that their goal is to prop things up. They don't care what reality is. It's distortions. That's all they're doing here. And what is that allowing to happen? A cascade of events here. Again, the Wall Street banks, the 1%ers, the 2%ers are allowed to speculate in this market, driving up this bubble here. We are now in the biggest, forget about the last credit derivatives bubble. It's much, much worse now. And this is, again, just distortions being created by the world central banks on purpose. So just that one metric is allowing fraud to bleed across every aspect and every asset class across the spectrum.
Well, the Fed is part of the fraud. I mean, you take a look at they say they're tapering. To your point, you say there's no taper. And that they may be tapering on paper, and they're not buying bonds, but they're financing the bond buying in places like Belgium with Euroclear and whatever. Somebody's buying the bond. So, if technically, yes, there's a taper, but really no, because to your point, the interest rates would go up. That would kill the economy, would it not? I mean, they cannot do this taper thing.
No, they can't do it. There is no taper. I've gone over this 1,000 million times. Absolute zero. There's no proof that they're doing anything at all. There's no transparency here. They cannot and will not allow interest rates to rise. And it's just the most basic concept that I think people just don't understand. As much as I talk about it, the Federal Reserve, again, has no magical powers. They're not wizards or warlocks or whatever. They can't just say, we're going to keep interest rates low, everyone. They have to get into the market. And they have to make it happen. So how are they doing it? By buying bonds through one way or the other, period. So whatever talk is coming out of their mouth is just garbage. And again, it's all part of the grand fraud or manipulation that is going on here. They will continue to do this, Greg, until the bitter end, because there's no alternative for them. Again, and this goes back to something I think we've discussed here. That the 2008 credit derivatives bubble, that was the party over moment. This is nothing. This is nothing but a terminal side effect, and there's no way out of it. Zero.
And J.P. Morgan, oddly enough, came out last week and said, it was really 1.6% negative growth. Wow, that's over 4% plunge quarter to quarter, and yet the government is saying, we're going to have positive numbers in the second quarter. I'm thinking, what? What say you?
All we need to do, Greg, and one thing only, and that is the velocity of money here. What is the velocity of money? Just real quick, it's the rate at which cash is moving through an economy. Without this one metric, without cash moving through an economy, you have zero growth. None. Now, we are at historic lows. We've never been here before. This is uncharted territory with regard to the money velocity. So, please, someone explain to everyone, or me or you, Greg, how we can have any growth at all with negative money velocity. It doesn't make any sense. It can't happen. It's part of the fraud. I mean, seriously, that is what is going on here. What is being force-fed to everyone, to the general public who are being made zombies. I mean, I'm telling you, Greg, the zombie apocalypse is real. But I really want people to understand that they shouldn't be looking at the stock market. And a lot of people, most people stare at it and focus here on the equity markets when they're trying to gauge what's going to happen. I don't do that. Personally, I think we need to look at the debt market or the bond market. That's where everything is going to happen first. That's where the actual implosion of the system, in my opinion, is going to begin. Because that is the biggest bubble of them all, Greg. And then that bursts, every other subsequent bubble is going to collapse with it.
I know you're watching what's going on last week with Iraq. Mind is, it's going to blow up with the craziness that's going on over in the Middle East. When do we have a party over moment over there? Could this be the continuation, or the bell ringing, or in 2008 you say it was a party over a moment, and they've kind of extended the party. When is the extended party going to end? Could this be one of the things that could end the extended party after the party's already been over since 2008?
They're letting this happen on purpose here, and let me put this into perspective for people to understand here. In the United States, we have an economy that needs to borrow cash into existence. It's built upon the acquisition of debt, period. This cash needs to be borrowed into existence and then dispersed. They don't even care where it goes. That's the truth. Because if this mechanism becomes impeded in any way, the whole thing will collapse. We do not have a wealth-based economic model. We have a debt-based economic model. Now, with that said, if you were to go back on history, Greg, and, I hate to have to say this as an American citizen, but it's a fact, and anyone can research this. The United States of America has been involved in more military conflicts than every other developed nation combined multiple fold. Why? It's the mechanism, the US dollar being the world reserve currency, needing to be borrowed into existence and then spent. So the propagation of war is paramount with this type of an economic model. So what I said earlier was they allowed this system to develop out there and this whole thing to come apart because I believe this is part of the scheme to keep it propped up. There is going to be bombs falling over there. This is part of their mechanism, again, Greg, to borrow cash into existence and then spend it and disperse it no matter where it goes. And the propagation of war, again, is being used here as a mechanism because it's the most expensive thing in human endeavor, war mechanism, because it's the most expensive thing in human endeavor, war.
NATO's Operation Gladio has moved into Ukraine, according to U.S. intelligence reports. Coming up,
the openly Nazi base of Kiev's new army. WikiLeaks cables by the U.S. ambassador. And the, quote, psychopaths of CIA special ops.
Proved once again that the United States of America is and will remain the greatest force for freedom the world has ever known.
Obama hits a new high this month, claiming the U.S. were the main liberators against the Nazis. MSNBC reports that in reality, World War II never ended, while publicly the White House demanded, quote, full denazification to charge those responsible for the Holocaust. Privately, even as the war against fascism was still raging, the White House was creating what it called rat lines to America for tens of thousands of Nazis, despite being classed as a menace to U.S. security.
You are the man responsible for hiring Bobby.
Yes, yes.
The White House created new identities for Nazi mass murderers like Klaus Barbie and deleted the records of their crimes, such as waterboarding.
The torture chamber had manacles with the spikes facing in, dangling chains, weird harnesses. Soon Klaus Barbie arrived. They held my nose, choked me with water. I thought my lungs would burst. Then came the questions. When Barbie pulled the chain, I went all the way under. He'd hang up his big watch to keep it dry. This lasted 2 hours. Then Barbie said, "Since you won't talk, we'll get your husband and son." He tortured my 16-year-old. My husband and son never returned.
Known as the Butcher of Leon, Barbie was accused of executing 4,000 and shipping 7,000 Jews to concentration camps. The US first hired him directly, then sent him to create the Fiancés of Death, hit squads that taught torture to military juntas. Hermann Becker-Freising, Siegfried Roth, Konrad Schaefer and Kurt Blome were all charged with gruesome experiments on Jews at concentration camps. All were admitted to the United States. It's just some of an estimated 30,000 Nazi war criminals brought to America. Many more were activated in Europe. Decades of bombings that have kept Europe in a state of terror are actually the work of Nazis recruited by the White House. Top-level officials in government and the CIA confirmed. Former CIA head Bill Colby calls Gladio, as the campaign is codenamed, a, quote, major operation. Attacks like the Taksim Square massacre in Istanbul, where snipers from a hotel shot into the crowds. Former Prime Minister Bülent Ecevit notes it was a Gladio operation backed by the US. The world's leading scholar on Operation Gladio is Dr. Daniel Ganser. He joins us. Great to see you. What do you make of what's happened in Ukraine?
Snipers shooting both demonstrators and policemen in Maidan. And it reminded me of Istanbul on the 1st of May. You had secret armies linked to NATO firing on people there on the square. And this then created chaos, and then you had a right-wing military coup. It all reminds me of strategy of tension. And it means that you create chaos and emotional distress in a population. When you do structure, the political structure falls apart. Today, we really must try to understand the strategy of tension, because otherwise we don't understand certain political events which are ongoing.
This is President George H.W. Bush greeting Ukraine war criminal Yaroslav Stetsko. Stetsko personally oversaw reports on the murder of 7,000 Jews. In 1941, he marched into Kiev with the SS and issued a proclamation praising, quote, glory to the German leader Adolf Hitler. President Reagan brought Stetsko to the White House and told him, your struggle is our struggle, your dream is our dream. Stetsko led the Ukraine Nazi group OUMB that formed the infamous Nachtigal battalion. His group went from town to town, liquidating entire Jewish, Polish, as well as Ukrainian populations, in total murdering some 500,000. Stetsko's notorious head of secret police, Mykola Lebed, writes the book Hitler's Shadow, was convicted of murdering Poland's interior minister. The group's publications called for ethno-genetically pure Ukrainian territory, in other words, quote, purging Poles and Jews. CIA Deputy Alan Dulles wrote this letter to the Immigration Commissioner demanding to assure Mykola Lebed's re-entry into the United States without investigation, which would attract undue attention to his activities. Foreign Policy in Focus notes Lebed and Stetsko were just two of around 10,000 East European Nazi accomplices brought to the US. CIA documents reveal paying massive salaries to Nazi war criminals such as Lebed and called them Ukraine's government in exile, waiting for the right time. These groups' time has arrived. Organizations like Lebed's OUMB have merged under the party today called Svoboda. Ukrainian national politicians now flock to these Svoboda ceremonies with soldiers in Nazi uniforms honoring SS war criminals. Elected Svoboda officials renamed a western Ukrainian street from Peace to Nachtigal, the battalion that massacred Jews in Ukraine and Belarus. Svoboda is led by Mr. Tagnibok. The Simon Wiesenthal Center in 2012 named him one of the world's 5 worst anti-Semites, who calls for, quote, purging Ukraine of its last 400,000 Jews. Tagnibok's endorsed by John McCain and Assistant Secretary of State Vic Newland, who in a leaked conversation was caught nominating Ukraine's post-coup leaders. Her reward for Svoboda's violence in the coup d'etat was 6 cabinet posts, the first Nazis in government since the Third Reich. Professor Barry Litucci, Vice President of New York's Holocaust Memorial Committee, points out Newland is of Jewish descent. When asked why she helps one of the world's most appalling anti-Semites, Litucci replied, that's a question for a psychiatrist. To mask psychotic behavior, mainstream media have received perhaps their toughest White House assignment to date, to convince the public there are no neo-Nazis in Ukraine. It comes as the country's fascists now go, quote, door to door in eastern Ukraine. If anyone is in, they are beaten or shot. The Holocaust Memorial Museum reports right after coming to power, Gestapo agents went from door to door. They arrested those who had spoken out against the Nazi party. Some were murdered. Author Stephen Lemon brought together leading experts in new book Flashpoint in Ukraine to explain some of the horrors taking place in the country. Dr. Lemon joins us. Great to speak to you. How bad's the actual situation become?
The rabbis preparing in case something very serious breaks out, the idea of a possible pogrom against Jews. And one of the rabbis said, we have 71 in one community. He said, we have 70 buses fueled and ready to go. The neo-Nazis, which is what they are in Ukraine today, are literally descendants of the Nazis of the earlier era. One of the leaders, Dmytro Yarosh, a cold-blooded killer, I've quoted him saying publicly, he boasted about wanting to kill Jews till he dies. I'm Jewish. If I was in Ukraine And what I know about Nazi history, I wouldn't wait around for a bus to take me out. I'd be getting out right away.
Fascists, most global research news, have become the military enforcers for the new Ukraine government. The US has financed the new Ukraine National Guard, reports author Michael Chossudovsky, called the Azov Battalion. Its emblem is a combination of the Nazi Black Sun and the SS division Das Reich. London's Sunday Times found the battalion is responsible for bloodshed against civilians that has caused revulsion amongst the population.
À l'horizon, seuls quelques groupes antiracistes ont pu passer les barrages de la police. Ici, les extrémistes jouent avec les symboles en se réunissant 237 ans après sur la plaine où s'étaient rassemblés les patriotes pendant la Révolution américaine. Symboliquement, ils cherchent à leur tour à réunir les forces racistes pour relancer leur révolution blanche, laissant de côté leurs luttes intestines. Ces différents groupes se rejoignent sur le slogan que leur peau c'est leur uniforme ou que leur peau c'est leur religion.
For the right to national self-determination, for our families, for our children, for our nation. Join me, white power! White power! White power! White power! White power! White power!
For over a quarter of a century, violence solves everything.
Ce n'est pas dans le nombre que se situe le danger de ces groupes, mais dans les liens qu'ils développent et les synergies qu'ils sont en train de créer. Aux États-Unis, ils sont près de 250 000 suprémacistes blancs. Si nous avons pu tourner ces images de Valley Forge, c'est à cause d'un malentendu. Certains avaient cru que nous étions de leur côté. Quand des responsables ont compris que nous faisions un documentaire, nous étions soudain devenus indésirables. À la fin de la manifestation, il n'était plus question de les filmer. Ils ont terminé cette rencontre des responsables à l'écart des regards extérieurs. Parmi les points discutés, leur développement en dehors de l'Amérique et la création de groupes identiques en Europe. Nous avons découvert que les principaux groupes des États-Unis ont des contacts étroits avec les racistes russes. Ils ont même créé des groupuscules à Moscou. Russie de l'après-communisme, devenue terre promise pour les racistes d'Occident. Russie de Poutine, en guerre contre les musulmans en Tchétchénie. Russie qui serait devenue la clé pour la survie de la race blanche. Russie, terre d'exil pour le White Power. Cette nouvelle génération est amnésique de l'histoire. Le paradoxe est incroyable. Après plus de 25 millions de morts durant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, les jeunes Russes s'affichent ouvertement néo-nazis. Comme aux États-Unis, ici, les groupes divergents réussissent à se réunir sous le slogan du White Power. Une sorte de préfascisme et de néo-nazisme se développe sur les ruines de l'ex-Union soviétique.
Солист группы, Tourist Band. Okay. Это Дмитрий из особого отдела по борьбе с неграми.
Il représente le département spécial de lutte contre les nègres.
Денис.
Monsieur Denis.
Солист группы Cyclone B.
Soliste de la groupe musicale Cyclone B.
Ну, это легендарный человек, самоуничтожитель негров.
Du Front National de la Jeunesse. Et le travail du Front National est payé pour les femmes. En Russie comme en France. En Russie comme en France, vous êtes l'avenir de l'Occident chrétien. В России, так же как во Франции, за вами будущее. C'est par vous, avec vous, que se créera l'avenir, c'est par vous que ce 21e siècle sera la renaissance des nations ou ne sera pas. Именно вы будете творить 21 век. Именно благодаря вам Россия поднимется с колен и будет самой великой державой в мире. À tous, bonne chance, bon courage et à très bientôt, j'espère.
Êtes-vous surpris de la présence de ce cadre du Front National dans ce meeting à Moscou?
Alors le sous-titre est tout à fait exact, il s'agit bien de Dominique Chaboch. Sa présence est tout à fait logique en Russie puisqu'il est l'un des responsables des relations internationales du Front National, il est membre du bureau politique, c'est un vieux de la vieille, c'est un cadre de toujours du Front National et qui assurait des relations avec les Serbes d'extrême droite et les Russes d'extrême droite. Donc de ce point de vue-là, il est complètement à sa place, le représentant du Front. Ce qui est un peu étonnant, c'est qu'ils tiennent dans cette assemblée-là, devant des gens qui tendent le bras, un discours de soutien, de sympathie, et avec lesquels il a l'air effectivement en phase.
Moi, je mets au défi de trouver dans mes 60 ans de vie publique une déclaration antisémite. Voilà, c'est clair.
Jean-Marie Le Pen condamné à 1 franc de dommages et intérêts pour ses propos concernant 4 journalistes. Vous vous souvenez peut-être que M. Le Pen avait traité Jean-François Kahn, Jean-Pierre Elkabbach, Jean Daniel et Yvan Levaille de menteurs. Les 4 journalistes cités étaient juifs. La LICRA avait donc poursuivi le président du Front National pour incitation à la haine raciale. Le tribunal vient de donner raison donc à la LICRA.
Le personnage en question a cru devoir dire que c'est parce qu'il était juif qu'il avait été expulsé. Ça ne se voyait pas ni sur sa carte ni sur son nez, si j'ose dire. Par conséquent, je ne le vois pas. Oh mais c'est toujours pareil. Ah, au secours, n'est-ce pas?
Non mais 6 millions de morts, comment c'est que...
Juifs,
oui.
Dans la Seconde Guerre mondiale, vous considérez que c'est un point de détail?
Non, c'est la question qui a été posée, c'est de savoir comment ces gens ont été tués ou non, n'est-ce pas?
Oui, c'est pas un point de détail quand même.
Si, c'est un point de détail, je veux dire de la guerre, oui. Enfin écoutez, est-ce que c'est... voulez-vous me dire que c'est une vérité révélée à laquelle tout le monde doit croire?
Je suis borné à dire que les chambres à gaz étaient un détail de l'histoire de la guerre mondiale. Ce qui est une évidence. Ce qui est une évidence.
Sachant les conséquences très néfastes qu'avait eu l'histoire du détail, pourquoi après ça vous n'êtes pas très vigilant sur ces sujets-là?
Monsieur Durafour, crématoire, merci de cet aveu. Je dois m'interdire de parler parce que le CRIF me l'interdit. Ça, c'est pas Le Pen, ça. Non. On ne peut pas attendre, ni mes amis, ni encore moins mes adversaires ne peuvent attendre ça de moi.
Cassez les couilles là, hein.
Et vous aussi, vous nous cassez les couilles. Vous aussi. Laissez-nous faire notre travail tranquillement.
On fait le nôtre, monsieur. Monsieur, on fait le nôtre.
Vous empêchez de le faire bien.
Non, il m'a cassé mes notes, cette connasse.
Tout va bien avec Marine, tout va bien. Tout va bien avec Marine.
Tout ira très bien en tout cas.
Vous avez parlé?
Pas encore, mais ça va venir.
Vous avez le droit de...
En attendant, à défaut de pouvoir parler à sa fille, Jean-Marie Le Pen lui a écrit. Puisqu'on lui a retiré son blog officiel suite à son dernier dérapage, le président d'honneur du Front National s'est permis d'en recréer un autre, sur lequel il publie une lettre destinée à la présidente du Front National.
Je suis victime d'une interprétation malveillante et diffamatoire faite par des ennemis politiques ou des idiots utiles. S'il y a eu une faute politique, ce n'est pas de mon fait, mais celui de responsables du Front National qui l'ont accrédité par leur déclaration.
Il interpelle ensuite directement sa fille en la vouvoyant.
Vous-même, n'avez-vous pas été mis en cause par votre déclaration sur l'occupation de rues par des fidèles musulmans, ou encore par votre présence à Vienne, à un bal, réputé nazi par nos ennemis?
Jean-Marie Le Pen finit son texte en demandant justice. Dès lors, il considère que l'incident sera bel et bien clos. Une polémique que les dirigeants du parti ont eux aussi hâte de terminer.
Il écrit tout cela est insignifiant par rapport à l'avenir de notre France. Je crois qu'il a raison. Moi, je pense que toute cette affaire-là, au bout d'un moment, c'est de la gnognotte, quoi. Il y a rien, c'est vide.
Jean-Marie Le Pen, une présence qui dérange au Front National. 74% de ses partisans estiment que le fondateur du parti est un handicap.
Residents in Slavyansk in East Ukraine were woken overnight to see the sky lit by what they claim were military firebombs being dropped on their city. Slavyansk is a focal point in the conflict. Locals say artillery fire has been ongoing for days. Schools, hospitals and government buildings have been partially destroyed and water and power supplies are regularly cut off. Ukraine's health ministry says more than 200 people, including 19 children, have been killed in the east since the government began its military operation. Well, as well as the regular army, the Ukrainian government has also been using National Guard conscripts, and they were the main force behind the military assaults in the east. But entire units have since headed back to Kiev, claiming they're unpaid and have been abandoned by the government.
According to official papers, we don't exist. We're an illusion. It's like we haven't been deployed here. We haven't got any ammunition, nothing. We were sleeping on the ground because we didn't even have tents. They just sent us there and forgot about us. And while all the generals and commanders were sitting pretty in their warm tents, guarded by the newest APCs, we were sent to fight like cannon fodder.
We haven't been paid. We got around $600 on arrival here 2 months ago, and that's it. We didn't have any food. Instead, they've been feeding us with promises that it's going to happen tomorrow. But we are tired of waiting.
Cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a cotton tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as hollow as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade.